What if I told you that Albus Dumbledore, the man who preached love, mercy and wisdom, was the most psychologically broken figure in the entire wizarding world? What if behind that calm smile hid a man consumed by guilt, so profound it devoured his very soul? Everything you believed about Dumbledore's goodness was a carefully crafted illusion. By the end of this video, you'll never see him the same way again. The wizarding world wants you to believe that Dumbledore was a saint, an old man who sacrificed everything for the greater good. He's framed as the moral compass of the series, wise, forgiving, and endlessly selfless. But that's the illusion. The truth is far darker. Dumbledore's every action, from mentoring Harry to manipulating the Order, was driven not by love, but by unhealed guilt and psychological self-punishment. We've been manipulated into thinking Dumbledore was the hero, because he spoke softly and quoted moral wisdom. But beneath that gentle tone lies a man haunted by the death of his sister, Ariana, and tormented by his part in her demise. Instead of seeking redemption, Dumbledore created a lifelong cycle of emotional manipulation to project his guilt onto others. Harry most of all. Ask yourself, why did he raise Harry to die? Why did he constantly withhold the truth? Why did he befriend the most dangerous man alive, Grindelwald, knowing it would end in tragedy? These are not the actions of a hero, they're the behaviors of a man subconsciously addicted to guilt, control, and moral masochism. The psychological evidence tells a completely different story. The story of a man who destroyed himself by trying to atone for a crime he could never forgive himself. Evidence. Let's begin with the root of Dumbledore's guilt, the death of Ariana. Psychologically, this event is Dumbledore's original sin. It fractured his moral identity at its foundation. Ariana's death wasn't just a tragedy. It was an unresolved trauma that created compulsive atonement behavior. In trauma psychology, this manifests as a pattern where the victim of guilt continually recreates emotional suffering to balance a sense of internal justice. Dumbledore's entire life after that moment was one long punishment. The savior complex as self-torture. Dumbledore's obsession with saving others wasn't selfless. It was pathological. The need to save is often a disguised need to control outcomes, especially in trauma survivors who failed to prevent past harm. Dumbledore couldn't save Ariana, so he created scenarios where he could save others, but only on his terms. Every mission, every chess move, every manipulation was about reenacting control over chaos. He wasn't protecting Harry, he was controlling him. He orchestrated the boy's every step, from placing him with abusive relatives to leading him into fatal confrontations, because deep down, Dumbledore believed suffering redeems the soul. It's a twisted moral economy, born from Catholic guilt and psychological self-flagellation. Pain equals purification, but it gets darker. 2. Gaslighting as a moral weapon. Look at how Dumbledore communicates with Harry. The withholding of information isn't strategy, it's gaslighting. Classic gaslighting psychology involves manipulating someone into questioning their own perception of reality. Dumbledore kept Harry perpetually uncertain, never fully trusting his instincts, always second-guessing authority. Why? Because uncertainty breeds dependency. Harry's identity became inseparable from Dumbledore's approval, a textbook trauma bond, and this is where the manipulation reaches its peak. Dumbledore made Harry love the person orchestrating his own destruction. That's not mentorship, that's psychological conditioning. 3. The narcissism of the greater good. Many interpret Dumbledore's early friendship with Grindelwald as a youthful mistake, but psychologically, it reveals Dumbledore's most dangerous trait: narcissistic moral idealism. He didn't join Grindelwald because he wanted power. He joined him because he wanted to believe his intelligence could justify anything. This is the ego's highest form of deceit, moral narcissism. The phrase "for the greater good" is the defense mechanism of someone unable to face their own shadow. Dumbledore wasn't trying to save the world. He was trying to redeem himself by controlling it. When that ideology killed his sister, he repressed his narcissism, but never healed it. Instead, he redirected it into benevolent manipulation. That's why he built systems, the Order, Hogwarts, the Ministry connections, where he could play the benevolent puppet master. A narcissist who hates his own reflection becomes the most dangerous kind. 4. The resurrection of guilt through Harry. Dumbledore didn't choose Harry because he believed in prophecy. He chose Harry because Harry mirrored his guilt. Both lost parents. Both were isolated. Both were tools in someone else's war. Dumbledore projected his own self-hatred onto Harry and turned him into a living symbol of atonement. When you study Dumbledore's interactions through trauma theory, a pattern emerges. Every time Harry seeks autonomy, Dumbledore tightens control. When Harry wants answers, Dumbledore deflects. When Harry suffers, Dumbledore watches. He calls it trusting Harry's strength, but it's actually a ritual reenactment, forcing another innocent to suffer in his place, so he can feel the illusion of moral balance. And what's the ultimate act of this pattern? Sending Harry to die. Dumbledore's plan for Harry's sacrifice wasn't noble. It was the ultimate projection of his own guilt. By allowing Harry to die willingly, Dumbledore symbolically kills the innocent part of himself he could never forgive, the manipulator who craved punishment. But here's the most paradoxical part. Dumbledore knew he was manipulating others. He confesses his flaws to Snape, not as apology, but as self-condemnation. He orchestrates his own death at Snape's hands, not because it's strategically wise, but because it's psychologically necessary. He needs to die by betrayal, the same pattern that defined his youth. This is known in dark psychology as guilt repetition compulsion, the unconscious drive to recreate the emotional circumstances of one's original trauma. Dumbledore's entire life is one long loop. Brilliance, betrayal, death. Each time, he plays both savior and sinner. His manipulation of Snape wasn't cruelty, it was a plea. Finish the cycle for me. But the psychological manipulation goes deeper. 6. The hidden theology of his guilt. Dumbledore's guilt has a quasi-religious structure. In psychoanalytic theory, guilt transforms into moral masochism, a need to suffer to feel worthy of existence. Dumbledore's calm acceptance of his death isn't peace, it's spiritual self-harm. He doesn't believe he deserves forgiveness, so he builds a world where forgiveness is impossible. Why do you think he trusts no one completely? Because trust would require vulnerability, and vulnerability might lead to absolution. Dumbledore doesn't want absolution. He wants eternal punishment disguised as leadership. 7. The subconscious desire for martyrdom. In his final act, standing atop the astronomy tower, wandless, powerless, accepting death, Dumbledore isn't facing Voldemort's war. He's facing Ariana's ghost. That's not courage, that's surrender. He engineered his own execution by Snape as psychological atonement. Every move, every manipulation, every soft-spoken lecture, all of it leads back to one truth. Dumbledore's real enemy wasn't Voldemort. It was his own conscience. Voldemort was merely the externalization of his internal decay, a mirror of the self-loathing he could never kill within himself. The horrifying truth is that Dumbledore's moral code wasn't rooted in goodness. It was rooted in guilt addiction. He needed pain to feel moral. He needed control to feel safe. And he needed others to suffer so he wouldn't have to face his own emptiness. Dumbledore didn't save the wizarding world out of compassion. He did it to justify his existence. Every smile, every twinkle of his eye, every Harry, my boy, was the mask of a man trapped in an endless psychological confession booth. When you re-watch the series through this lens, you'll see it everywhere. The hesitation when he touches Harry's shoulder, the tear in his eye during Snape's death, the silence before his own end. They're not the gestures of serenity, they're the tics of a man quietly disintegrating. This is Dumbledore's final curse. Not a spell, but a psyche consumed by unending guilt. He spent his life trying to cleanse the world of darkness, only to discover that the darkness was inside him all along. He didn't defeat evil, he became its most tragic victim. So now ask yourself, how does this change your view of Albus Dumbledore? Was he the wise mentor we were taught to trust, or the most complex manipulator in wizarding history, a man whose guilt masqueraded as love? The more you understand Dumbledore's psychology, the more his goodness looks like a desperate illusion, a man weaponizing virtue to mask self-hatred. He didn't guide heroes, he manufactured them to die in his moral theatre. And that's the true tragedy of Dumbledore. He was never free, not from Ariana, not from Grindelwald, not even from Harry. His brilliance was a cage, and his conscience was the warden. If you've made it this far, you're no longer just a Harry Potter fan. You're one of the few who sees through the illusion. Share this video with someone who still believes Dumbledore was pure. They deserve to know the truth. And remember, this is only the beginning, because next time, we'll uncover how Voldemort's childhood wasn't evil, it was engineered. The darkness in Harry Potter goes far deeper than magic. It lives in the human mind.